My name is Average Joe, and I'm a proud geek with expertise in movies, superheroes, and animation.
My name is Beef Pork Ribs. I'm a fine repository of esoteric knowledge, which I suppose most people would qualify as geeky. Though I dabble in many fandoms, my main areas of expertise are anime, movies, and Belgian comics, with a strong recent insurgency of D&D.
Our mission is to bring nerd and geek culture to the masses
by sticking it all under the microscope.
Welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast.
Movies, comics, graphic novels, TV, cartoons, animation, nerds are geeks, entertainment culture. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power. Nerds and geeks, come gather around the scene. Come and join us in the Bat Jar. Come and tune into Average Joe and his team. Lots of room here in the Bat Jar. When the newest nerdy news drops, these podcast pals put it under the scope. DC, Marvel, Disney, Star Wars, cinematic, multiverse. It's mega Christmas, strangest franchise. Hear it on the Bat Jar, Nerdy Power.
Hello there, and welcome to the Bat Jar Podcast, where we put nerd and geek culture under the microscope. Beef Pork Ribs is away this week visiting family for Thanksgiving. He's entitled to at least 1 week off a year, I would say. So this week we have a special guest with us on the show, someone who's been on the show a couple times now. So I will, on behalf of Beef Pork Ribs, welcome back Michael Andrew to the Bat Jar Podcast.
You told me the first time I got on the podcast that's either Average Joe, Average, because I accidentally called you Joseph.
Michael Andrew, we're happy to have you back. What is something nerdy or geeky you've been up to since you were last on the show?
Nothing new since the last time. Kind of watching Netflix series Cobra Kai. Is that considered nerdy or geeky?
I would say so. It's part of pop culture anyway.
Yeah, I've been watching that quite a bit. With yourself, might I add?
Yes, this is actually, I should acknowledge this. This is the first time we're actually doing like all our recording in person. Since Michael Andrew and I live together, we're able to actually just do a face-to-face recording. It's kind of, I don't know how to feel about it. It's the first time since late March that we've actually done a podcast recording in person. So indeed, we have watched Cobra Kai together, and our other housemates kind of just shake their heads at us because I'm one to get emotionally invested in TV shows and like yell at the screen, but you're right there with me, and I'm very surprised because usually you're pretty laid back and chillaxed, but then when it comes to Cobra Kai, the emotions are running high.
Yeah, I don't like watching anything too dramatic because I get dramatic. Yeah, we really should talk about that at some point. Somebody, put that in the Bat Jar, please.
Yeah, we know that there's a season 3 coming out and a season 4 has been announced, and I think we're just over halfway through season 2 now. So we're, friends of ours have like told us, "Oh, I binged both seasons in a weekend," and we're pacing ourselves, and like good for us.
It's too emotionally taxing on myself, so I personally I can't binge the entire 2 seasons. That's too much. I might die.
Yeah, I appreciate the chances to just cool down between, because if you haven't watched Cobra Kai, there's a lot of characters and it's really hard to tell like who the protagonist is or who, like, because no one is like morally 100% in the right. Like there's something flawed about every character's logic, and just when you're starting to root for someone, they do something that's just not right. Ugh.
Well, that's not the topic of this conversation. Let's not get into it too much. We'll save that for another episode, I'm sure.
But you've also, if I recall, you're also rewatching The Legend of Korra, which I would say is very much in the realm of nerd and geek culture.
Yeah, I guess so. Like, it comes and goes. Like sometimes I would watch it, and I do find it more enjoyable than the first time I've watched it. So I'm giving it a second chance.
Meanwhile, I have not made any progress on the original Avatar: The Last Airbender since I think I told you guys on the show a few weeks ago that I started watching the series. I've not gone past episode 11 yet. It's partially Cobra Kai's fault. Anyway, all that to say, let's just get right into it today. This is an episode that I knew was going to happen eventually. In fact, that's probably why I wrote the topic into the Bat Jar myself. We're talking about a Netflix series called Titans today. it's a Netflix series for people who live in Canada and other parts of the world. It's actually not a Netflix series in the United States, and we'll get into that a bit. And just to kind of bring you into like how hard this is for me, I can distinctly remember a year and a half ago, actually hanging out with Beef Pork Ribs in person. And I told him I'd been watching Titans, and he asked me what I thought of it. And I went on for like 20 minutes, kind of just sharing my reactions and my thoughts. And I had a hard time putting into words how I actually felt about the show because I had so many conflicting feelings and thoughts. And it reminded, yeah, I just had a hard time making sense of the show and if I should recommend it or not. So I knew that eventually was going to come that we were going to talk about it on the podcast, but I'm still wrestling with myself in terms of how to approach this. And by the time we're done our conversation, you'll probably get a sense of why. In terms of the show has 2 seasons that have aired, and a 3rd season is coming. I think we're probably just going to go full spoilers here because there's reasons why the show is not what it should be, and you can't really explain that without getting into spoilers. So if you're hoping to, I don't know, hear about the show or get a sense of if you should watch it or not, we'll do our best to avoid spoilers till the latter part of the conversation. We are really talking about the Titans, or really they're the Teen Titans characters, for the first time on the podcast. I think we did the Teen Titans Go to the Movies movie, but this is, I guess, we didn't do a Secret Origin segment back then. So, Michael Andrew, what is your secret origin with the Teen Titans franchise?
So just to be upfront, like I don't know much about the background story or even the comic book origins. My experience with the Titans or Teen Titans is the animated series Teen Titans, not the Teen Titans Go. I think that's the most recent one, right? But the first iteration of it.
What's the matter, Robin? Feeling lonely since they exterminated all your friends?
They were your friends, too.
I don't need any friends.
What did we ever do to make you hate us so much?
You were born.
So I actually really enjoyed that. I love watching that on, I think it was on YTV, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, that's my experience with it. So it was definitely a different experience watching this live action Titans show.
Yeah, that Teen Titans show was great because while it was animated, it took its characters seriously, but it also somehow found ways to be fun and zany and anime inspired at times. And to get into my secret origin, that's kind of how I was introduced to the Teen Titans as well. I was, of course, familiar with Robin because I grew up on Batman and whatnot, so I knew who Robin was. But all the other characters who were highlighted in the Titans, in the Teen Titans show, I should say, it was my first introduction to them. And that was around the time I was actually getting into reading comic books. And what I didn't know at the time is that the new Teen Titans, which is where like characters like Starfire and Cyborg were introduced in the 1980s, those were actually like the most popular DC comics of that time. Like they were the number one best-selling comic book that DC Comics had. And so really like getting to know these characters in the animated show and then going back and reading their comics from the 80s and 90s, they were essentially like the most popular characters DC had. So they had a lot of really good stories told about them. And, you know, there's a reason why their comic book was the top selling, best selling comic of the time. So I grew up on the Teen Titans show and then read a lot of the comics surrounding those characters. And, you know, as I've become more and more of a DC fan, I've read different iterations of the Teen Titans comic books. The New Titans, there's one series that's just called Titans, and all the characters, I should say, that are part of the Teen Titans universe show up in other things like Young Justice that I've been very attached to. So at this point, I'm a huge fan of a lot of these characters, and that's probably going to color my impression of the Titans show. So there you go. That is our Secret Origins segment for this week. Michael Andrew, does it surprise you to hear that the Teen Titans were at a time like the top selling, best, most popular characters DC Comics had?
It's a little surprising just because when I was watching it, it seems like it was directed to teens and children, which was enjoyable. I didn't think of it as something that the general audience would actually love to consume. But personally, if I put myself in my teenage shoes, I would say yes. That's not surprising at all because I really enjoyed the certain complexities of the characters that they created in the show, and how it was, like you said, it was fun. It was, um, yeah, it was well written and animation was great. So comic book wise, if it reflects that, then I have no doubt it. I wouldn't be surprised. Basically, is what I'm saying.
The New Teen Titans were so popular in the 1980s that when they decided to do their big giant crossover with Marvel Comics, they actually had the New Teen Titans team up with the X-Men, who were at the time Marvel's most popular characters. Wasn't the Justice League or any other group of DC characters they had to, because again, New Teen Titans was the biggest thing. So that's just, in my mind, that shows how the epitome of success these characters had. Now, of course, the Teen Titans as a team, if you will, in the comic books have been around since the late 1960s. And you can imagine the idea was to essentially take all of the sidekick characters, all the teenage sidekicks that these superheroes had, and put them together in their own team. So Robin being the first teen sidekick of any superhero was, of course, involved. And the other original members were Speedy, who is Green Arrow's sidekick, and Aqualad, who was, of course, Aquaman's sidekick. And their roster expanded to include Wonder Girl, the teenage sidekick of Wonder Woman, and Kid Flash, of course, sidekick of the Flash. And that series kind of went on for a few years and kind of disappeared because it wasn't as interesting. But when it came back in the 1980s as the new Teen Titans, not only did they bring back all these sidekicks, but they also introduced new characters like Raven, Beast Boy, Starfire, Cyborg, characters that people who think of Teen Titans nowadays, they associate with those characters, not necessarily all the sidekicks.
Whoa, they weren't part of the original Teen Titans.
No, yeah, because the original idea is that these were all like the teenage sidekicks getting together to be their own, I guess, like their own version of the Justice League.
Wow. Okay, that's surprising. That's something I did not know. Thanks for the information.
Yeah, and I think that's gonna have to inform our conversation about the series because the new Teen Titans era in the 1980s I keep talking about, it kind of gradually transitioned from being a team of mostly sidekicks to other superheroes to more original characters that, by the time you get to the 1990s in the comics, pretty much everyone who's a member of the Titans is no longer a sidekick of any other superhero. They're kind of all their own people. And sure enough, that's kind of all the secret origin stuff out of the way. Now we can't talk about Titans without talking about the DC Universe streaming service. In 2016, I want to say that they announced that this streaming service was going to be happening and that was going to be all DC content. And they announced that their flagship title, or like the new original show that was going to be made for it, was Titans. And when that announcement was made, I was very intrigued because being a big fan of Teen Titans from the show and the comic books, I was like, yeah, it would be really cool to see a live action version of this. And hearing that the producers of Arrow and Flash were going to be involved, I'm like, okay, there's a certain caliber of quality that I can expect from this series. I'm guessing, Michael Andrew, you probably weren't following comic book TV news in 2016 and were totally unaware that this show was being made.
That is correct.
So do you recall when you actually would have first heard about Titans?
I'm pretty sure I just heard about it when it came on Netflix. Pardon my ignorance.
Okay, well that's good because it helps bring the different perspectives to the table. Because I literally follow like every step of the production of this series because I was, again, super curious and I was interested what this DC streaming service was going to be like. And I was very disappointed when they announced that it was only going to be available to residents of the United States, that you couldn't essentially access their streaming service or any of its content unless you lived in the United States. And just like The Mandalorian was kind of like the big flagship series that launched with Disney Plus, they were really marketing Titans as that flagship series for DC Universe. So if you wanted to watch Titans, you had to get DC Universe as a service. The first piece of advertising they did for this show was a picture of Robin in his costume. And it's kind of mostly in shadow, and he's like from the side, and he has like the bow staff over the back of his head. But it was enough to get me excited because it was like the first time we'd seen a live action Robin costume since, Chris O'Donnell in Batman and Robin. And it looked really cool. And it really piqued my interest. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I'm really interested in this. And then the second photo they showed were costumes of Hawk and Dove, two characters that were going to be part of the series. And I'm like, okay, like I don't know these characters very well, but their costumes look very comics accurate. And that, as a fan, told me that the show was going the right direction, at least with the visual style of what the show looked like. But then more and more initial photos from like the set and just production still started coming out of what some of the other characters looked like. And the show started getting a lot of negative feedback. The first photos people saw of what Raven was going to look like on the show, what Starfire was going to look like on the show, what Beast Boy was going to look like on the show, drew a lot of negative press. And people were already kind of disowning the series before they even saw a trailer because they saw the set photos and they didn't like what they saw. A lot of this is because those characters in the comic books have very distinct visual styles. Starfire is an alien who has green eyes, orange skin, and like bright red hair. Beast Boy is green skin, pointy ears, and green hair. Raven has like almost like a whitish grayish skin and like this blue-black hair. Very distinct visual styles. And the set photos, which granted, I mean, set photos are never like a final product. They're just something that's taken very candidly. But they showed that Raven kind of had like a terrible blue hair dye situation going on. You saw that Beast Boy had green hair, but he had his like normal colored skin. And the same thing with Starfire is that the actress had red hair, but she had her regular skin tone. And there was some issues because there was some, I guess you would say, like racial bending with the characters because they cast an African American actress to play Starfire. They cast an Asian American actor to play Beast Boy. And some fans took issue with that. I honestly didn't understand that. But more so the fact that they didn't match the visual styles, what the characters were meant to look like, sent the wrong signal to me. In contrast to the photos we'd seen of Robin and Hawk and Dove, here were these photos we were seeing of the characters seemingly looking nothing like they did in the comics or the animated series for that matter. I'm guessing, Michael Andrew, since you weren't following the show's production like I was, you didn't have that negative bias going into the show.
I didn't. I understood the grittiness, which was popular at the time, which I guess we're gonna be talking about it later on. So I also understood how there's a creative space where people can have that license to change things, and I wasn't really opposed to the aesthetic changes in the characters. But I totally get why people were up in arms.
And then in the summer of 2018, 3 months before DC Universe was set to launch and we were going to get this series, they announced and they showed the first trailer. And it's very famous because at one point, where's Batman? You see, oh, this show is going for a very dark feel and a very dark tone compared to even Arrow or Flash. And you could get the sense it was really trying to like fit in with like Daredevil and Jessica Jones and like those Marvel Netflix shows that kind of like were so dark and gritty and had like a certain feel to them. So it was certainly like a big wake up call to me. It's like, okay, like this ain't like the Teen Titans that I remember from my youth. This is like taking a different direction and seeing some of the characters in motion. The visual choices they made kind of made more sense to me. So all the trailer really did is it gave me a lot of not necessarily fear or anxiety, but just trepidation for the series. I'm like, okay, this could go one way or the other, and I really don't know how it's going to go. On this topic of gritty, violent, lots of swear words type of TV shows. That certainly was popular at the time. And I can understand trying to make a superhero story for a different audience. And that was, like I said, it was popular at the time. And I guess DC Universe was trying to market itself as a service for adults. Now, I want to ask your opinion on this, Michelangelo, because some people hold the opinion that it's ridiculous to try and make superhero media for like anyone other than kids. There's this idea that it's like, why try and take this concept that is obviously like meant for a younger audience and just warp it so that it fits like that more dark and nihilistic adult tone. Are you on board with that?
My understanding is they're following the money. Like the people who grew up watching Teen Titans, reading Teen Titans, are at the age where they are adults who have money to spend. So that is the right demographic to target. Like I found myself being that demographic when this got released. So it actually makes a ton of sense for them to target, and I think the industry was targeting um my demographic, young adults, young professionals. So that makes sense.
And this series set the tone for DC Universe in terms of release schedule. Netflix had, of course, adopted the style of like, let's just drop a whole season at once and people can binge it. But DC Universe, I guess, in a way to try and keep customers, they had a weekly release schedule for Titans. So a new episode came out every week. And I think that was partially done to ensure that people kept their subscription to DC Universe. Michelangelo, like, where do you feel on, like, do you prefer when a streaming service launches a whole season at once, or do you kind of like the weekly release schedule that kind of mirrors, I guess, what network television usually does?
I'm conflicted in this idea, especially the 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 tone that they set for the show, the grittiness, especially the increased violence. There's a lot more blood involved. I think it's it's nice to have the space to let it breathe, like to let the episodes breathe for shows like these, um, because it can be extremely overwhelming for people to like binge watch it. And I'm sure people do. I actually don't remember if when this was released on Netflix, if it was released all in one go or per episode.
To my annoyance, and this is what made it hard for me as a Canadian, it's like I really wanted to watch Titans, and it debuted with DC Universe in September 2018. But because DC Universe wasn't legally available in Canada, we had to wait for a Canadian company to purchase the licensing rights, and it ended up being Netflix Canada. And that was the case, I think, in a lot of regions, actually, because DC Universe was only available in the US, so different brands of Netflix picked up the rights. And instead of airing the show week by week like DC Universe was, they opted to wait until the whole season had aired and then do one big Netflix style dump of the show at once. So we didn't actually get access to the series in Canada until January 2019, after the whole series already aired in the States, and I had to try and avoid spoilers on YouTube and Twitter and internet articles, because again, people were talking about the show as was airing in the US. And yeah, the way we had it available to us is that we could binge it.
I Knowing that, then I definitely binged it. I totally forgot. I'm pretty sure I watched it when it was released. I do faintly remember Netflix putting that on the front page, like advertising that it just came on. So I definitely watched most of the first season. I feel like in a few days. That may have been to its detriment because it felt overwhelming. I actually couldn't remember a lot of the first season until getting ready for this episode of the podcast, and I had to look back and kind of rewatch the shows, and I realized I've actually watched most of it.
So in a sense, you had forgotten that you had watched the show.
Yes, and it's only been what, a year since it got released in Netflix, so I don't know how that fares very well for the episode. It might also be, like I said, it might have been beneficial for this type of show to get released on a weekly basis.
So I mentioned this before, just like The Expanse and The Umbrella Academy, this show actually films in Toronto. And so my roommate our roommate, I should say, Professor F, actually came across the filming of Titans one day when he was in Toronto, and he actually took a shot of a picture of Beast Boy from a distance. He was like, "Hey, isn't that guy from that show Titans?" I'm like, "What? You saw them filming?" Anyway, that's the closest I've ever gotten to the show. And again, Professor F doesn't watch Titans, but he had walked in on me watching enough times that he, of course, recognized the guy with the green hair and the red and white jacket. So let's just okay. So we've talked about how it was associated with DC Universe and how it's Netflix internationally, and yeah, I basically kind of like not necessarily I didn't watch the whole series at once, but I did watch more than one episode at a time, and so I really noticed the pacing when I was watching it kind of back to back. I think it probably would have worked better if I was actually watching it week to week because some of it felt repetitive, some of it felt like the story was going on for too long. And this is the long and the short of it, guys. Titans is not a very good show. If you want to stop listening now, I don't blame you. It's there's kernels and little moments of like good in this, but there's so much that's like missing the mark that it really impacts the whole thing. So, Michael Andrew, let's can you attempt to describe what the story of Titans is?
End your little experiment, or I will burn this place down myself.
There's ghosts in this place. Tell them what happened.
Look, I don't take orders from you anymore, man.
Get out of my way.
You're in my way.
Would you do it again? Devote all that time and trouble for someone who just wants to leave?
I would do everything exactly the same.
I'm not sure if it's the right thing to do.
I don't think you have a choice.
You ready for this, Grayson?
Oh, putting me on the spot right now, huh? Oh, that is extremely hard to explain, especially since the focus of the story seems to be revolving around Raven, even though technically she's not the protagonist in the story.
That's okay. Yeah, and that it alone illustrates how difficult this show is to talk about because there isn't like a solid you would think with a title like Titans, it's a show about the Teen Titans, which again is a group of young, mostly teenage, young adult superheroes or characters with superpowers getting together, forming a team, a bunch of essential outsiders becoming a family. Like if you look at the Teen Titans show from 2004, you have 5 main characters, okay? You have Robin, who has distanced himself from Batman to the point where that show never mentions Batman, and he's kind of maintaining his secret identity. He's a loner. He does all this cool stuff. Then you have Beast Boy, a guy with green skin. He doesn't exactly fit in. He turns into animals. He's very much an outsider. Then you have Cyborg, a literal cyborg. He's part robot. He's an outsider. He doesn't fit anywhere. Then you have Raven, this girl who has these weird empathic powers, and she has hard time controlling her emotions, and she's literally like the daughter of a demon. She is an outsider. And then you have Starfire, who is this alien with orange skin, who is literally a fish out of water. They're all outsiders in their own way. And that's kind of this whole idea. It's like many other superhero teams, the idea of Teen Titans is this idea of found family, this idea of outsiders, people who don't necessarily fit in with the larger world, kind of coming together and serving the greater good. That's what the story of Teen Titans is about, or it's supposed to be about. Michael Andrew, does that sound at all like what Titans the show is?
You know, listening to you talk makes me feel super sad about watching this show because that is not the case. That is what I actually enjoyed about Teen Titans is the togetherness and how they solve like problems they face, like challenges and villains together. And that was not the case here. It's like multiple storylines, like individual storylines of each hero, kind of just like in one show.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of probably the major problems with this show is that it's not really about the Titans. The characters are all there, except Cyborg, because they decided to use him on the Doom Patrol show, which spun off from this. That they have like in season 1 anyway, there's kind of like 4 people who are marketed as the main characters, except they barely have anything to do in the story. They actually have entire episodes dedicated to supporting characters, which from my perspective, being a big DC fan, it's like, yeah, I know who Hawk and Dove are. I know who Donna Troy is. I know who Jason Todd is. And it was cool to see them on, in live action in a show. But arguably, they're not meant to be the focus of this. You have these other characters who you are billing as your series leads who aren't getting the focus and the attention, to the point where our main characters hardly have any screen time together.
And may I add, I actually like the episode about Hawk and Dove the most. That's probably I love them as a character, and I think I actually would have loved to have a spin-off show just about them more than like the other characters.
Yeah, and again, this is where I see some good here. This show is trying to do so much, and it's trying to really make it feel like it's the DC universe, where literally all these characters from the DC comics exist, and they all have their stories. And if you know the backstories in the comics like I do, you can literally just see one of these characters on screen, and you already know, oh, they've gone through this and that and the other thing, and now they're part of this other story. But I'm sure for someone like yourself, who's probably being exposed to these characters the first time, you're just overwhelmed.
I think they give justice to people, um, to new people, to like the universe, or to each character. I think I may have benefited by knowing less about the characters than people who are as invested as you are, because I think I actually had more chance to enjoy how the writers and how the creators portray these characters, especially getting to know the development of each character instead of having one entire team. It allowed me to get to know them and kind of be more invested, which um, not a lot of shows are doing, especially with so many characters involved. They actually try to build a foundation, and for people who already know the characters very well, this may seem redundant, or it may seem like they're missing the point of the entire Teen Titans concept.
And this is where I think I see one flaw of Titans as a show. Is that it's trying to be both the new Teen Titans, which was the introduction of these less of the sidekick characters, where you had Raven and Beast Boy and Starfire and the like. But then it's also trying to be like classic Teen Titans, and that it has a bunch of the sidekick characters as well. And it's just too much for, even though the first season has 11 episodes, there's just too much going on, and yet not enough going on at the same time. There's no central plot. And as you pointed out, the first season centers around Raven plot wise. She's kind of the driving force for the plot. But they really portray Dick Grayson, who people might remember from our previous episodes on the Robins and on who Nightwing is, that Dick Grayson, the first Robin to Batman, he's really portrayed as the main character here. And it's his storyline we're kind of following through. And even though Raven, again, is the one who's central to the plot, it's all told from Dick Grayson's perspective. And honestly, at times it does feel like it's a Dick Grayson show and not a Titans show, which I would be fine with if that's what they called this. If they called this, I don't know, Robin the series or Nightwing the series, I'd be fine with that, because then it would justify why all these other characters are there, with Dick Grayson being so much in the focus. And maybe they were just trying to do a Batman show without having to actually getting to use Batman himself. And this is another thing that really bothers me about this show, is that, as I've said before, Dick Grayson is one of my favorite comic book characters. So you would think that I would love having him front and center in a TV series, but he shouldn't have the focus this much in a show about the Titans. The Titans is supposed to be an ensemble. And we'll talk about this more later, but where they go with Dick Grayson's character, in my opinion, totally misses the mark for what that character is supposed to be. Okay, I just said a lot of words. Michael Andrew, do you have any response to that?
Oh boy. No, I feel like that's on the mark. I do want to kind of, I think there's still an opportunity for people to really enjoy this. And yes, I think the focus is not really on the Titans, but the fact that it is there's a second season, or has it been approved for a second season?
There is a second
There's a-
season that's already finished, and a third season's been announced.
Been announced. So I think I haven't watched the second season, but I do think they're creating a foundation. That's how I'm seeing it, anyways, and that's how I'm trying to take this entire Titans aspect. So they're kind of building an origin story for each one. That's what it appears like, and my hope is that there's the culmination is that they do come together and it becomes the Teen Titans that we imagine and that it should be.
Well, I got news for you. Season 2 is done and it's on Netflix, and it's a lot of the same. Dick Grayson is still hogging a lot of the focus, and a huge part of the story is repeating the story arc he had in season 1. And they introduced Deathstroke, who is like the Titans' biggest enemy, and the storyline they come up for him feels like it's total retcons involving a previous. Anyway, I'll have to say, like, season 2 is an improvement over season 1, but barely. And they introduce more characters who are underdeveloped. They continue to keep trying building this world out without really setting a good foundation. It's like they can just continue to add on to the house without, again, providing a good foundation for the actual series to stand on.
That's a little disappointing. I mean, I think I would still enjoy. Like, I enjoyed the character development. The introduction of new characters will probably get lost in me, especially if I don't know who they are. Like, it's hard for me to like buy into and get invested into each individual characters when what I actually desire is to just be invested in the Teen Titans that I know.
Okay. Now, my big caveat on all I've said so far is that the way I am choosing to look at this series as if it's an Elseworld story. Now, big DC fans will understand the term Elseworlds as a kind of a story tool, but Michael, Andrew, do you know what I mean when I say Elseworlds?
I have no idea.
So Elseworlds is this idea that DC Comics came up with in the late 80s. They wanted to start telling like alternate versions of their character stories. So the first story that ever came out that was kind of an Elseworlds tale, it was a comic book called Gotham by Gaslight. And the idea for that was that it was, imagine if Batman existed in the 1800s and Batman had to go up against Jack the Ripper. So it was a Batman story set in like Victorian era Gotham City. And it was a very interesting take. Like, you imagine if Batman existed during that time period, what he would look like, the tools he would use, his detective style. It was an interesting story told outside of the, canon or like the official storyline of Batman. And so Elseworlds was introduced as this idea for writers to get creative and tell alternate versions of the character stories. They didn't have to be so stuck within what was the current continuity for the characters. And so from this idea of Elseworlds, we've gotten a lot of unique, interesting stories that have been told over the years. So I have to look at Titans as if it's an Elseworld story, that it is literally just a group of creators taking this idea of who the Teen Titans are and telling a different story with it. Because the way the characters look, the way the characters act, the version of the story that's presented here is, from my eyes, so different and so off base for what I would expect for these characters that I have to assume that they're looking to reach a different audience than people who would be very attached to the characters. Because if that was their intention and they're trying to like get the attention of people like me who care a lot about these characters, then they did a terrible job, because they're not really adapting the source material. They're just taking the source material and doing like a Riverdale kind of thing to it, where they're going in their own direction with it.
Oh, that's an interesting thing to know about. I think you have mentioned Elseworld or the concept of it before, and that actually might be how they're taking it. It's not as extreme as you said, like Riverdale, but I guess for people who do know the origin or the original storyline and characters, that makes the most sense.
I'm also maybe I'm a little forgiving of Titans, because it seems so much of like this show's production is tied to the state of the DC streaming service. Because again, the show was developed to be like the flagship thing, that was going to be the show that got people to sign up for the service. And so like the way they marketed it was maybe to like try and get people's attention, and maybe like including like the more gruesome stuff was like, hey, like check this out, this looks different than what we've seen before from DC. And even like I found out that the season 1 finale was actually pivoted out of season 1. Like they actually took what was supposed to be the penultimate episode and they made that the season 1 finale. And then the show that was supposed to be the season 1 finale ended up becoming the first episode of season 2. So there was clearly stuff going on behind the scenes where I guess they wanted to extend the interest of the fans. They wanted to make sure people kept their DC streaming service until season 2. And it makes sense in the way that season 1 just sort of ends, and then season 2 awkwardly begins with what feels like the end of one story before starting another. When you hear that, Michael Andrew, does that surprise you? Does that make sense?
Okay, so like I said, I haven't watched season 2, but that makes a ton of sense because season 1 ends in a weird way. This might be a spoiler, so I didn't want to really talk about.
No, forget it. We're going straight into the spoilers. This show doesn't deserve the spoiler warning.
Okay, all right. So it ends in kind of like a dream state, right? Like Dick Grayson is kind of like transported into like how do you explain it?
It's like a nightmare essentially.
Yeah.
Where Batman's gone nuts and he's killed the Joker and he's killing everybody.
So that's kind of how it ends. Like they have an entire episode in this dream nightmare state, and that's how it ends. Like he doesn't get out of it, and it's like it doesn't emotionally build to anything because the storyline within this dream doesn't really affect the real world. It only affects Dick Grayson's mind, which it actually doesn't say. Is it negative? Is it a bad? Like there's an indication, but it doesn't have the same build up as many other season finales. So it makes me actually want to watch at least the first episode of season 2 and actually have that that emotional build up.
Yeah, I mean, I stopped watching season 2 about halfway through it. Like season 2 came out in January 2020 in Canada because it aired in fall 2019 in the US. And I made it about halfway through, and I tried resuming it yesterday, but knowing I've watched YouTubers talk about it and see how the season ends, and I'm like, well, this doesn't look like it ever improved. And I tried watching some more episodes, and I'm like, no, like there's still some dumb decisions here, still some poor choices with the way they took the story. In the same way that Rachel / Raven serves as like the main drive of the plot through season 1, but never without ever being the protagonist. Deathstroke kind of fills the same role in season 2. Like he is meant to be like a through line throughout the series, except they introduce a second villain halfway through, and then they bring him back at the end of season 2, and it just seems sloppy. Like again, like they were trying to do too much. And okay, I'm just gonna get into this Dick Grayson stuff now because, as I've said, Dick Grayson is probably my favorite comic book character. He, like Batman, lost his parents at a young age, but unlike Batman, was able to bring his parents' killer to justice. And it was through training with Batman and being Robin that he was able to kind of take all the pain that he experienced and turn into something good. Whereas Bruce Wayne spent all those years kind of just being depressed about his parents being killed, and all that emotional trauma that was unserved because I guess they don't have therapists in Gotham City, led to him devoting his whole life to becoming Batman. And the story of Dick Grayson transitioning from being Robin and becoming Nightwing is a very good story when told properly. And that's what Titans tries to do. It tries to tell the story of Dick Grayson transitioning from being Robin, Batman's sidekick, to becoming Nightwing, his own superhero, his own character, apart from Batman. Now, based on what you've seen in Titans, why do you think Dick Grayson stopped being Robin?
Based on what? Okay. How I took it is, well, I mean, he was very straightforward about becoming like Batman, about being engulfed by like the darkness, almost. I don't know if he said that word for word, but it was along the same lines where it's like the lines, the moral lines is being blurred for Batman and also for himself.
Exactly. The show presents it that, oh, the reason why Batman and Robin stopped working together is because Dick Grayson acknowledged that he had become too much like Batman and had to get away from it. In fact, at one point in the show, I have this quote here. He literally says, "When I put on that mask, I become someone who likes hurting people." And that does not describe Dick Grayson's character at all in the comics. As Robin, as Nightwing, as Dick Grayson, that's just not his character. And what they really did with Titans, at least from what I can tell, is they basically turned Dick Grayson into Batman. They made his character a Batman, and that way their show can have a Batman character on it without him actually being Batman. Because at that point, I think Batman was pretty much preserved for being used in the movies. So what you have here is a core misunderstanding about the conflict between Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson and their approach to crime fighting. The best versions of the story from the comics, and I'm thinking of Batman the Animated Series here as well, is that Dick Grayson reaches a point as he's finishing college where he understands that his approach to crime fighting is different than Bruce Wayne's. There are lines that Bruce Wayne is willing to cross that Dick Grayson is not willing to cross. And he, on his own, as he's matured, decides, I'm not going to be a part of this anymore. I'm out of here. Titans presents us a different version of the story that says, actually, Dick Grayson realized that too late. He realized that his views were different from Batman's too late, because by the time he actually acknowledges this, he's essentially turned into like a violent Batman type himself. And I think the show even like fundamentally misunderstands Batman to a point, because they make it sound like Batman's like okay with like brutalizing people to the point of like, you know, more or less like breaking their backs and almost killing them, because the way that Robin behaves, he like throws his, you know, his weapons and like gouges up people's eyes and like takes like planting attire to their crotches, and like that is stuff like the idea of how I perceive Batman would never do. Batman is not that necessarily violent. Sure, in Batman versus Superman, he's branding people, but in my mind, they're like those aren't quite exactly the same thing. And even that's like a more dark take on Batman. So what these moments in Titans are showing me is that they misunderstand who Batman is, and they misunderstand who Dick Grayson is, because the Dick Grayson, air quotes, that you meet in this show has essentially already become a super violent Batman wearing the Robin costume, and that he resents Batman for turning him into the monster that he calls himself, like the weapon that he is. And granted, that's the focal point in the comics and in the animated series as well, is that there's a pivot, there's a turning point, there's a road that Dick Grayson's not willing to go down. Batman is willing to sacrifice everything in his life for the sake of his mission. Dick Grayson is not. It does not fully consume his life the same way it does for Batman. But Titans, again, in my perspective, gets these things fundamentally wrong. Michael Andrew, please tell me if I'm thinking about this too much or if I'm too invested.
I get it. I get it as especially looking at it as a purist of based on the characters. I get why there's you feel so emotionally like outraged by the changing characters. But the creators and the writers may have also fallen into the times of how everything was being built and how everything was being written, what people were attracted to. I personally was attracted to the idea of a gritty Teen Titans, even like to on the edge of like being violent. So um it was easy to detach myself from my ideas of Teen Titans and to um how the character was being written for this live action Teen Titan show. So I think there's two different demographic that they're targeting, then two different reactions, and I think that's showcasing with our conversations right now, because I don't feel as strongly attached to it. I also am not as attached to the character of Dick Grayson as you are, so that just might be me.
There's one YouTuber whose videos I watched on the show. If anyone wants to go check out his channel is called High Top Films, and he does some episodes where I feel like he really deconstructs Titans as a series very well. And he hits on some of the same things I've said here about, especially that character of Dick Grayson. And so I appreciate what you have to say, Michael Andrew, because yeah, it is possible that I'm just not the audience of the show, or that I just can't get over in my head like how I imagine Dick Grayson being portrayed on the screen. And the other thing that bothers me about this is that I know that this show will be like the only exposure some people ever have to Nightwing, to Dick Grayson. Like they'll never read a comic book, they'll never see another piece of media with him in it. And I've seen this with like the Marvel movies, that people like see those and they assume, oh, that's that character. That like, oh, whatever is presented in movies or TV is like the definitive version of the character. And I've had to scream inside because this Dick Grayson is not the definitive Dick Grayson by any means. At best, it's an Elseworlds version of Dick Grayson. And I guess I'm worried because I care so much about the character, that if this is the only version of the character people ever see, they're going to have a totally wrong impression of who the character is.
I do have to add, yes, that is definitely something that people have done, and I'm sure that's influenced me, maybe subconsciously. But I like the aspect of, if this attracts more audience to watch and to consume this form of media, superheroes, DC characters, like, I think that just benefits the community overall. Sure, you're gonna get into a lot more arguments about people trying to, um, with people thinking that this is who Dick Grayson is. Um, so it's hard to say. I think it's a win, especially during the time 2018, 2019. I think it was a win for DC, and it's a win for superheroes. And people who like this type of character will continue to follow this type of stories, right?
It took them way too long to have Dick Grayson become Nightwing on the show. Like they literally delayed his like arrival in the Nightwing costume till the season finale of season 2, so that they could market it in the ads. Be like, oh, gotta check out the season finale. Get to see Nightwing in his suit finally. Like it literally took them 2 whole seasons to get him moved on into his new role. And like I would say 3/4 of the way through season 1, they had kind of hit all the beats they needed to with the story, but they kind of just repeated it and repeated it, and it just went on for far too long. And now I'm willing to like check out season 3 to like see where they go with it, because it does seem, at least by the end of season 2, that they've gotten to the point where it's just a team of people calling themselves the Titans actually doing things together. And now that he's fully embraced the persona of Nightwing, maybe that'll finally like be a turning point. But like as far as like the first 2 seasons go, there's just so much that I have issues with. And like again, that's just with Dick Grayson. With all the other like air quotes main characters, their storylines are so simple and they disappear for episodes at a time, that entire episodes are kind of devoted to supporting characters. Heck, there's even a whole episode that sets up Doom Patrol as a separate show, because that was another thing that DC Universe was trying to do, is make more content for their service. So there's a whole episode. It's the episode that introduced Beast Boy, because in the comics he is associated with the Doom Patrol, so that makes sense. But it just feels like so much of the focus of that episode is like introducing these other characters who went on to then have their own show. All that to say, I will say one thing positive about Titans is that it really does portray the character of Jason Todd really well. Jason Todd, again, if you remember our episode on the history of all the Robins, Jason Todd is Robin 2, the second person to be Robin in the comic books. He's famous for having been killed by the Joker, and that there was like this whole thing where people you could call the hotline to decide if the character lived or not. That's kind of like what he's most famous for. So the fact that we've gotten to see so much of him in this show, I would say on point for how the character is meant to be portrayed. That's the one positive thing I'll say about it. But maybe Michael Andrew, maybe you have some nice things to say about the show, because I certainly don't have many things to say.
If you are craving 2018 2019 content, like the grittiness, the gritty type of take on old characters, um especially if you grew up with these superheroes. Maybe you've only watched Teen Titans, or you've recently watched Titans Go, I think that's the name of it, and you want to watch it in a different light. I think this is a great content to kind of like cleanse your palate with, right? To see it in a different light. And I'm sure there are still some people who enjoyed and are still enjoying that grittiness, that more violent, the more adult oriented superhero content. I think there's always going to be an audience like that. So I still kind of enjoyed rewatching it. I enjoyed rewatching Titans, and I think if you haven't watched it yet, it's a great watch. Maybe even nothing seriously dissecting each characters as average Joe has been doing. But as a casual fan, if you want something more violent, I guess, uh, if you like super, if you like to see superheroes in a different light, I think, yeah, I still recommend it. I still recommend it for people to at least give a chance. Watch the half of the first season.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's yeah. This this certainly is a version of the DC universe that exists. Going forward, the DC universe streaming service, ironically, is coming to an end. It's actually being transitioned to a platform for comic books only, and all the TV shows that were being made for DC universe are being turned into originals for HBO Max, another streaming service we don't have in Canada. But I'm guessing since Titans is a Netflix show in Canada, that it'll continue to be a Netflix show, and hopefully, like the third season will come here to Canada on Netflix. I really hope so because I'm getting tired of all these streaming services not being available here and shows that we can't watch. So, having said everything that I've said and all the opinions I have about Titans, I'm sure that there's an audience for this show. And even though I dislike many elements of it, there's certain character moments, and there's certain like ways certain characters look, and there's certain story beats that are in here that I actually like. And so it keeps me from really like genuinely like hating it and loathing it. There's just a lot I don't like about it. And I'm choosing to look at it as an Elseworld story. It's something that it's just an alternate take on the characters. And I have to hope that someday, and maybe it'll be the season 3 of this show, that they're going to pivot to being more quintessential in their interpretation of the characters. Because I guess that's what I'm really looking for, is I want to see like the quintessential, I don't want to say perfect, but like the ideal version of the characters from the page represented on screen. The MCU generally seems to do this, where they kind of like take all the best parts in the comics and they try to bring that into the movies. Most of these shows like Titans take the characters from the comics and they take them in a particular direction, whether that's necessarily faithful to the source material or not. So having said all of that, if I look at the first 2 seasons of Titans, I can't give this thing more than 2.4 out of 4 bat cookies.
Okay, actually, that's better than I thought you were gonna give them. So I'm around the same 2.7 to 3 out of 4 bat cookies.
That's quite the range there. You want to maybe like narrow it down to 2.8?
2.75.
2.75. Okay, we'll take it. So Titans is on Netflix in Canada. It's on DC Universe in the US until January, and then it pivots to being on HBO Max. So if you're listening to from the US, you can wait till it's on HBO Max to watch it, I guess. Don't bother paying for DC Universe for like 3 months. If you're in Canada, it's on Netflix. You might like it.
Give it a shot, please.
Yeah.
Give it a chance. You never know.
So normally this is when we would go into the bat jar and look at our mail, but we don't have any this week. So Beef Pork Ribs is going to magically appear here from the past to tell us how you can get a hold of the show.
If you want to reach the show, you can send us an email at
batjarpodcast@gmail.com.
Or you can tweet us at
The Bat Cookie Jar.
You can find the Bat Jar Podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, including YouTube, because we got a channel. Share our posts on Facebook, write reviews, give our shows a rating. This will help all people join us inside the Bat Jar, and we appreciate it dearly.
All right, so now it's time to go inside the Bat Jar and pull out a topic for next week. And since we're recording in person, Michael Andrew, you get to actually... I don't have to be the person pulling out of the jar this week.
Wow, this always makes me nervous because I feel like I might break this jar.
Well, we broke one bat jar towards the beginning of the show, and we've had this guy ever since. So luckily it has not broken. So
all right.
We've had TV shows for a few weeks in a row here, so I'm hoping it's something less... Maybe it's another TV show. Who knows?
All right. Video game movies.
Okay, that's not TV shows. Those are that's certainly a thing. Michael Andrew, what's your opinion on video game movies, real quick?
People might hate me, but I actually like Prince of Persia, the movie. I liked it more than a lot of people trashed it to me. Uh, yeah, so please, guys, don't hate me, don't judge me for it. But yes,
Okay, but in general, people have a very negative impression of video
yes,
game movies.
it's people are very invested. It's hard to translate a video game into a movie. Like that's two completely different mediums.
And I'm sure we're going to talk about the Super Mario Brothers movie next week, but to me, that's like Titans. It's like taking the idea and going a totally different direction with it. So that's as great a transition as any. Michael Andrew, thank you very much for being here today and helping me just sort out my feelings on Titans.
It was a pleasure. It was a pleasure to see you in person, even though I do see you in person quite often. But to hear your reaction, it's wow, a lot of energy here.
And we're recording on the Sunday of the Thanksgiving weekend, so I'm thankful for you helping me sort out my feelings on this because I'm just so conflicted.
Oh boy.
And next week's episode will, I'm sure, bring about a lot of emotions as well. So come back to the Bad Sharp Podcast next week when we talk about video game movies. And until that time, I'm Average Joe.
I'm Michael Andrew.
Catch you on the flip side.
Now you hear me. Now you